Hello there and welcome friends. This video will be all about the Magus class. Magus can certainly be a very powerful class in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous because of two very powerful abilities. The first is your Arcane Weapon enhancement that lets you add quite a lot of useful properties to any weapon you are wielding in your main hand. And the second, the ever so infamous Dimension Strike, which lets all of your melee attacks become touch attacks to easily hit even high armor class enemies in the game. Your elemental enchantments actually have extremely powerful synergy with the Elemental Barrage Mythic ability, thus allowing massive amounts of damage per attack. To start this guide, I'll first talk about the common mechanics to the Magus class such as Spellstrike and Spell Combat, and later I have brought two different builds for you, one based on Arcane Rider so you can have a mount, and the second, the very popular Sword Saint, for maximum critical damage against your foes. Alright, so let's first talk about the basic Magus class features. First we have of course Spell Combat and Spellstrike. These work in somewhat similar ways, so they can be a bit tricky for new players. First we have Spell Combat, which your Magus already starts out with at level 1. First you need to have a hand free, so you cannot be two-handing a melee weapon. As a full round action you can make all of your melee attacks at a -2 penalty, and then also cast a spell from the Magus spell list, so you get to both do your full attacks and also cast a spell all in the same action. Here is an example. I only have Spell Combat on. I'll set the Vampiric Touch spell to auto-cast by right-clicking it with the mouse, so it goes right here. And notice how as soon as I attack this succubus, I'll be able to both cast the spell and do my full attacks all in the same round. Let's see how it goes.
Forwards!
So notice my character is preparing to cast Vampiric Touch here, but you'll also select attack.
That's how you hit them!
And now notice how he cast a spell. So here's the damage from Vampiric Touch, and right after that he already began attacking the Galu demon close to the succubus. And keeps attacking it with his full attack. So once again you get to cast a spell from the Magus spells list and also do all of your attacks in the same round. Do note that by only having Spell Combat on, the spell is cast normally, so for my Vampiric Touch I dealt 10d6 unholy damage. Now let's talk about Spellstrike, which is gained at level 2. Whenever you cast a spell that has a touch range, so a melee touch attack, for example, you can deliver it through your weapon as part of a melee attack. So instead of using a melee touch attack to deliver the spell, you can actually cast the spell from an extra free weapon attack. So you get an extra attack and then you cast the spell from the same action. The added bonus is that of course you basically gain an extra attack to deliver the spell, and then the spell damage is added to this attack as well. So let's turn Spell Combat off and just leave Spellstrike on to see how it truly works. Let's use Vampiric Touch to target the same succubus as before. The difference is that now we'll get to deliver our spell through a normal melee attack, so from the scimitar we have equipped. Let's see how it goes. So we are going to cast the spell now. So notice how we immediately attacked with our weapon right after casting Vampiric Touch. We dealt our normal weapon damage against the succubus, so physical damage right here as slashing. And notice how right down below in the same action we make a spell casting check to overcome spell resistance because of our Vampiric Touch which we delivered to this attack, and deal its damage as unholy to the succubus. Amusingly enough, because our character got a cleaving finish attack, he also got to attack the Galu demon nearby with the same Vampiric Touch powered through our normal scimitar attacks. Now see how we only got to attack twice, one to cast the spell and the second from the cleaving finish ability. By having just Spellstrike on, you only get to cast a single spell, which will be delivered to your normal melee attack. Now the real fun comes from having both Spell Combat and also Spellstrike on at the same time. This way we get to both deliver a melee touch spell through a normal scimitar attack, or whatever one-handed weapon you choose, and also perform our full attack in the same action. So it's basically the same as if getting an extra free attack, casting the spell, and then still being able to perform all our normal attack actions. So let us now cast the same Vampiric Touch at the same succubus, but with both Spell Combat and Spellstrike on. Let's set this Vampiric Touch spell to autocast, move closer to the succubus as this does require a full round action, so if you are far away from the enemy and have to spend a move action going towards it, especially on turn base, chances are you won't be able to perform a full round action. let's attack the succubus. We are casting Vampiric Touch. We attack her weapon. And notice how we keep attacking right after, in the same round. Casting it again. And we just keep attacking. For touch spells as a Magus, you have spells such as Corrosive Touch, Frigid Touch, Force Punch, and Vampiric Touch. But remember, you can also use the Touch of Fatigue cantrip, which you have infinite uses of, to basically spam Spell Combat and Spellstrike together for a free attack. Notice that to use Spellstrike and Spell Combat, you need to have a free hand, so you cannot be wielding two-handed weapons. This brings me to one of the points why I don't find Spellstrike and Spell Combat that useful in Wrath of the Righteous. Notice how by one-handing my scimitar I have 60 to 100 damage. If I turn Spellstrike and Spell Combat off to two-handed, notice how my damage increases from 60 to 77 and 100 to 117. That's a lot more damage in my opinion, especially when you consider the critical hits and so on. But second, well, you might have noticed that all of the Magus touch spells actually have to penetrate the enemy's spell resistance before getting the effect. And in the case of Magus, you are somewhat feat starved. You won't have feats to spend in spell penetration and mythic spell penetration. And as you might already know, most of the enemies you face in Wrath of the Righteous have decent to high spell resistance. So chances are whenever you try to cast a touch spell with your Magus, you are not really going to penetrate the enemy's spell resistance, unless you are at the upper mid to late game. I don't find this extra attack to be that needed at all. Both my Sword Saint and Arcane Rider builds already have a massive number of attacks per round. For the Arcane Rider, you start with your horse, which already comes at 3 attacks, and eventually gain Cleave and Cleaving Finish. As for my Sword Saint, you already start level 1 with the Cleave feat for an extra attack per round, and gain Cleaving Finish as soon as level 3 for up to 3 attacks per round. That's not to mention the extreme amounts of attacks of opportunity your character will be generating per round. Honestly, I don't find you need Spellstrike and Spells Combat, so this is why my builds are going with two-handed weapons. But do note that if you want to benefit from these abilities, you can just go with a scimitar, for example. Alright, so let's get started on how to build our Magus character. I'll first begin with my Magus Arcane Rider build. After all, I do believe Arcane Rider is a lot better than Sword Saint, at least in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, but I'll also cover Sword Saint after this. So let's first talk about why I believe Arcane Rider is so good. Well, the main reason of course is that we get an animal companion as soon as level 1. In this case a horse. Horse is not really the best of the animal companions, but we can certainly make do with it. And the best part is that with a horse you can ride your pet as soon as level 1, so right at the beginning of the game, which makes for a very fun and smooth gameplay experience. I don't think it needs saying that pets in Wrath of the Righteous are absurdly powerful, and I have already shown you in my recently released Mounted Combat and Cavalier build guides how powerful Mounted Combat can be. Now Arcane Rider also has even more benefits that also enhance his horse. First, your abilities that spend Arcane Pool also apply to your horse. Now when it comes to the main Arcane weapon abilities, so the elemental enhancements and other properties, this won't actually work on your horse. I do believe it's a bug, so I have reported that. On the other hand, the most insane of all of the Magus abilities, Dimension Strike, does apply to your horse. So whenever you use Dimension Strike, both your Magus and your horse will have all of their attacks treated as melee touch attacks. Do remember that horses by default already start with 3 attacks per round, 4 with haste, or even 6 if you have a SKALD party member. So that's basically 4 to 6 extra melee touch attacks that you will be making in a round. At level 9, an Arcane Rider also gets the rather useful Dimensional Ride ability. By just spending a single point from your Arcane pool, as a move action, you'll be able to teleport both yourself and your mount horse to any spot within a 30 feet range. And this can certainly be great for bypassing enemy choke points and reaching their backlines. Anyways, let's get started with our Arcane Rider build. For race, I like going with human as always for the extra feat. You can go with either a Falchion if you don't care for spell combat. Yes, that's apparently the correct way of pronouncing it. I know I was saying Falcon before. Or a scimitar if you want to benefit from it. If you want to go with scimitars, then pick the regional background and Shackles Corsair for a +1 attack bonus to scimitars. I personally prefer Falchions, so for going with Falchions, pick Street Urchin and then Pickpocket for the bonus to initiative. As far as your attributes, it's very simple. 19 Strength, 12 dexterity, 14 constitution, and the rest of the points go into 14 intelligence, so we can enhance our spellcasting and also increase our arcane pool. You will be able to use headbands that increase your intelligence, so we don't need to bother increasing this further. For skills, pick Athletics, use Magic Device, Mobility, and I know that Mobility is not a class skill for us. Even then it's useful when it comes to mounted combat to help avoid at least a single hit to our horse. Now the other point is up to you. You can certainly go with either Trickery or also Stealth. After all, we won't bother with armor, so we won't be getting a penalty. I'll be going with Stealth myself, as I tend to use CAMELLIA for Trickery and she doesn't have points to spare in Stealth, as I prefer to have her focus on Perception to detect traps. Just as with my Cavalier, Mounted Combat, and then Spirited Charge. Just by charging out of battle with Spirited Charge, our damage will gain a massive boost even as soon as level 1. Pick the horse, of course. As for spells, True Strike, Shield, Grease, Enlarge Person, and Reduce Person. Now we won't have high difficulty class with the Grease spell, but it's still a very powerful spell that you can cast during the early game. Now deity choice is up to you, but remember we are going Trickster, and we want our alignment to be chaotic good. So I would choose someone like Kaden or Desna. This way we can be chaotic good just fine. Now why chaotic good, you might ask? It is true that for Magus, the best alignment is lawful good. But because we are a trickster, we have to make do with chaotic good. That's because Magus can actually enchant their weapons with both the axiomatic and holy properties, so long as they are lawful good. If they are chaotic good, they can only enchant their weapons with holy, which is still very powerful. At level 2 we basically only gain more spells, and remember that as a Magus, at least as a Sword Saint or Arcane Rider, you can actually scribe spells into your spellbook to learn them from scrolls. But anyways, magic weapon, and if you want to use Spellstrike or Spell Combat, then one of the touch spells like Corrosive Touch. For your level 3 feat, be sure to pick Combat Reflexes to get started on our Attack of Opportunity feats. Now for your first Magus Arcana, I would go with Extended Magic. It's basically extend spell for free 3 times per day, which can help with our low level buffs, especially during the early game. Now you might ask why not get Arcane Accuracy? Well, it is easily outclassed by the Dimension Strike ability that we get at level 9, and they both cost a swift action, which are limited to just 1 per round, and increase in strength in level 4 as with all of our other levels. As for level 2 spells, I would go with Mirror Image. It is true that while mounted, all of the attacks will target our horse, but remember that attacks of opportunity can still target your Magus, so Mirror Image will help when it comes to avoiding the few attacks of opportunity you might end up receiving. Besides that, Glitter Dust can also make for a very powerful early game spell. For a level 5 feats, Power Attack to highly enhance our damage, and then Cleave. Cleave can be quite powerful early game as it's basically another free extra attack. For more level 2 spells you can pick Frigid Touch if you want to use Spell Combat, and also Blur to buff your party members, or even one of the animal buffs. Now at level 6 we gain another Magus Arcana, and this choice is extremely important. Be sure to go with Enduring Blade. So by default Arcane Weapon only lasts for a single minute, which is very low. Enduring Blade, however, turns that into 1 minute per Magus class level, which is perfect, as this means we'll get to benefit from Enduring Blade for the whole dungeon. And that's basically the same as having Elemental Barrage for days. Your level 7 feat choice is simple as usual. Outflank, of course. For the best level 3 spells you can get early, Greater Magic Weapon and then Haste. For more level 3 spells, Vampiric Touch if you are using Spell Combat, and also Displacement for higher concealment. For your level 9 feat, seize the moment to finish our very powerful Attack of Opportunity enhancing feats. At last we also get the extremely overpowered Dimension Strike ability. So by spending 2 points from your arcane pool as a swift action, all of your attacks will become melee touch attacks. This is simply crazy, because as you might already know, enemies in Wrath of the Righteous always have way lower touch armor class than they do their normal armor class. And this is also a great ability for when your character is caught unbuffed. And remember, as an Arcane Rider, this will also automatically apply to our horse for even more damage and attacks. At level 10 we get our first level 4 spells, and honestly, the Magus list for level 4 spells is awful. The best ones would be Greater Invisibility, and also Dimension Door, so you can access some hidden areas in Chapter 4. You can get Stone Skin, but frankly I would rather save this for the Stone Skin communal spell that hits your entire party. And characters like Camellia can cast it as soon as level 11, or for wizards like NENIO as soon as level 9. For a level 11 feat, the choice is simple: Improved Critical, and then Falchion. As for a bonus feat, pick Cleaving Finish to basically give us a free extra attack whenever we kill an enemy. For our level 12 Magus Arcana, be sure to go with Devoted Blade. And this is why we are going with a good alignment. After all, only good aligned characters get to enhance their weapons with Holy. Now remember that before level 13 you should already have Perception to rank Mythic Trick from Trickster, so we can get now access to our special Trickster feats. Alright, so at level 13 it's finally time to get started on our special Trickster critical feats. So improved, critical, and then your weapon of choice. More useless level 5 spells here. For level 15, another Trickster critical feat. As for another Magus Arcana, you have a few different choices. Bane Blade can be useful, after all it's Bane against every single enemy in the game, which means +2 to attack bonus and an extra untyped 2d6 points of damage. But when it comes to demons and evil outsiders, you can just cast the divine spell Crusader's Edge for the same benefit. Still, this ability can help against other enemy types like swarms, cultists, and so on. Besides that, it only costs a single point from Arcane Pool, so can be very useful and cheap. Ghost Blade can be very powerful as well because of the brilliant energy property. The problem is this ability is very expensive, and ideally what you want is at least 2 elemental enchantments, holy, and then something else. We won't have enough points to spare for this. If you want the brilliant energy property, then simply have Finian. Besides that, if you are using spell combat, then you can benefit from Quicken Magic, so you get to cast your spells in spell combat as a swift action. So basically, I think overall I would rather go with Bane Blade. At level 16 we finally get our level 6 Mega spells, and unlike the very disappointing level 4 and 5 ones, the ones here are actually decent. You have most of the mass version of the animal buffs, but I would save this for Camellia or a cleric. The transformation spell can be very useful as a Magus. It does block your spellcasting, but honestly, as I said before, I don't find much of a use for spell combat, so my Magi are only going to be attacking really. By making your attack bonus into high, you get attack bonus equal to your class level, which does actually enhance the damage bonus you get from the power attack feat. The spell Magic Greater can also be useful for debuffing enemy bosses. For our level 17 feat, pick the last of the special Trickster critical feats. Improved, critical, improved. And also Weapon Focus, and then your weapon of choice, in my case Falchion. For your level 18 Magus Arcana, you can truly pick anything you want. I'll be going with Quicken Magic because at least we get to quicken some of the Trickster buffs, like the Trick Fate spell. At level 19, Weapon Specialization, and then Falchion, or your weapon of choice. Now level 19 is also quite big for Arcane Rider Magus, because they get greater spell access. Sword Saints don't get this at all. So you can basically add any spell from level 1 to level 6 from the wizard spell list to your Magus spellbook. The best choices would be Genie Kind, Echolocation, Greater False Life, the normal False Life, Sense Vitals, and the last choice is up to you. I'll pick Mage Armor just because I liked it, not having to rely on potions of it. At long last we are at level 20, so the last point into strength. And we also gain our Arcane Rider Capstone ability through Magus, and for this you should certainly pick the attack bonus ability. Alright, now let us talk about Mythic progression for our Magus. As usual, Instrument of Freedom for our first Ascension ability. For your first Mythic ability, the choice is very simple. Elemental Barrage, of course. Remember that as soon as level 5, we can already enchant our main weapon with triple elemental enchantments. Elemental Barrage will proc on every single one of your attacks. For Mythic rank 2, I like going with extra Mythic ability, and then Ever Ready. After all, as a Trickster build, we get a massive critical range and an extreme amount of attacks of opportunity generated per round. Now for Mythic rank 3, you can go with Mythic Charge. For your first Mythic trick, pick Knowledge Arcana 1 so we can find weapons with higher enhancement as soon as the end of chapter 2. Now at Mythic rank 4, Improved Mythic Critical of course, and then Falchion. As for our Mythic tricks, if you've already watched some of my other Trickster builds, then the choice is simple. Perception 1, and then immediately Perception 2 right after, so we can finally get our extremely overpowered critical boosting Trickster feats. Now for Mythic level 5 as an Arcane Rider, pick Mythical Beast to increase our horse's power. For a Mythic trick, Athletics rank 1. For Mythic rank 6, Mythic Power Attack. Now the other Mythic trick choices here are going to depend on what you want. For example, by picking Infuse Magic Device and then Reuse Magic Device, which is the rank 2, At the next Mythic level, we'll be able to get the last UMD rank, which gives us a full scaling wizard spellbook equal to our Magus class level. I don't find this that needed for a Magus because, well, they can already cast some of the best wizard spells, at least not for an Arcane Rider, which get the true Magus Arcana ability close to Mythic rank 7. For an Arcane Rider, I would much rather get Knowledge World 1 at Mythic 6, and then also World 2, to increase our critical chances further by making any one become a 20 whenever we roll a d20. For a Mythic level 7 ability, you can go with Abundant Arcane Pool, for even more castings of Dimension Strike per day. And at this point the enemies start to get quite bloated armor class. For a normal Mythic trick, you can go with Religion 1, so we can later get Religion 2, level 7 greater Mythic trick. If you are an Arcane Rider, then I suggest you go with World 3. For Mythic rank 8, I would go with Mythic Sneak Attacker, but you can also choose Flawless Attacks, or even Mythic Weapon Focus. For a minor trick, go with Mobility rank 1. As for an improved trick, you have two choices. Athletics rank 2, if you want higher power to your saving throws, but you can also just get it at the next level. And also Lore Religion rank 2, for some decent domain powers. My favorite one would be Artifice Domain, because we can get the spell Lead Blades, which does increase our weapon damage by a decent amount. An interesting domain to pick for a Magus Trickster is the Law domain. After all, we can use the Staff of Order ability to add the axiomatic property to our weapons, even though we are chaotic aligned, for an extra 2d6 to our blade damage. Alright, so now we are at Mythic level 9, our last Mythic for all intents and purposes. And honestly, you can go with whatever you want here, such as Unrelenting Assault for more damage, and your last trick can be anything. I'll go with Nature 1 rank. As for the last improved trick, Athletics 2 rank. Alright, now let's talk about our Sword Saint Magus build. Let's take a look at our special class features. Sword Saint does gain a lot of unique features when compared to other Magus archetypes. First, you have the Chosen Weapon ability. At level 1, you choose a weapon type, and you will gain weapon focus with them as a bonus feat. The best part about this is that we can actually pick exotic weapons such as Fall Shard, which is what I will be using for this build, so we won't need to bother spending a feat in exotic proficiency. They actually cannot wear any armor at all, which doesn't really matter. And they even have the Canny Defense feature to add 1 point of intelligence bonus per Magus class level as dodge bonus to their armor class. Now this might seem useful, but as I'll explain later on, this build is focused on Fall Shards, which is a reach weapon. Just as an example, the yellow area around our character is basically his Fall Shard range. Now just by casting a large person on our Magus, our range already pretty much, well, more than doubles. Just look at that. And of course, later on you can also cast Legendary Proportions on your Magus for an even more insane weapon range. But it's certainly more than enough so that your Magus can easily attack the enemies from the back of your tanks, such as your pets for example. At level 4, they gain the very useful Perfect Strike. By spending a single point from your arcane pool, you can maximize your weapon damage. Instead of rolling for damage, your weapon will deal their maximum damage. And the best part is, if your hit is also a critical hit, you can then spend 2 points instead of just 1 to increase your critical multiplier by ×1. And this is extremely powerful. At the end game, when supported by a SKALD and by going the Trickster Mythic route, your Magus will have ×7 critical multiplier. There's no words to say how crazy powerful this can be for damage. They also get Critical Perfection at level 9 to add your intelligence bonus on critical hit confirmation rolls. This doesn't really matter that much. But in addition, you also get to use your Magus level in place of your base attack bonus to qualify for any feats, which means earlier access to some fighter exclusive feats. Lethal Focus as well, so that whenever you attack a flat-footed opponent, you add your intelligence modifier on damage rolls. Besides that, Superior Reflexes at level 11. They also get Perfect Reflexes at level 19 for an automatic 20 roll on any initiative rolls. Lastly, they have the same capstone ability as Fighter, so at level 20, your critical multiplier with your chosen weapon will increase by a ×1. Now the main downside of Sword Saint is that they actually receive a single less spell slot per level, and this can actually result in you not having any slots for the level when you first get them. For example, at level 6, a Magus will have a single level 2 spell slot. However, a Sword Saint will have 0 by default. You can actually bypass this by having enough intelligence bonus, so for example, If our Magus has at least 14 intelligence by level 6, he will have an extra spell slot of 2nd level, and because we only have 0 as a Sword Saint, this will equal in a +1, which is enough for us to cast level 2 spells, at least once per day. Now the last of the Sword Saint downsides is that they can only gain a 3rd Magus Arcana at level 12 instead of level 9, and another one at level 15 instead of level 12. This is actually somewhat annoying because they can only get the extremely powerful Dimension Strike Arcana ability at level 12 instead of level 9. So let's get started on our Sword Saint build progression. As usual, go with Human for race, at least it's my favorite. For background, Pickpocket for the bonus to initiative. The ability point allocation is the same as with my Arcane Rider. 19 strength, 12 dexterity, 14 constitution and 14 intelligence. For skills, be sure to pick athletics, use magic device, and the other points are up to you. I like going with trickery and stealth. Now our feat selection at the early levels is going to be different than that of our Arcane Rider. Because we have a Fall Shard, which is a two-handed weapon, be sure to go with both power attack and then cleave. For your chosen weapon, we want Fall Shard, of course. I won't bother with spell selections because I've already talked about this in my Arcane Rider section. And I'll also talk about spell allocation later on, so you can just watch that. For deity, just like with Arcane Rider, remember to pick a deity that lets you be chaotic good, as we're going Trickster. At level 3, pick Cleaving Finish. With this feat, we'll now have around 3 whole attacks per round, so long as we kill an enemy in the same round. Extended Magic for our Magus Arcana. At level 5, pick Combat Reflexes to enhance our attacks of opportunity. And also Improved Initiative. It is true that we get to roll 20 for Initiative, but this only comes at level 19, which is extremely late game. So Improved Initiative will be of great help in the early and mid game. For our level 6 Arcana ability, Enduring Blade of course, to extend it to 1 minute per level. At level 7, Outflank. At level 9, because of Critical Perfection, we can actually pick Improved Critical and then Fall Shard earlier than our Arcane Rider, who only gets it at level 11. At level 11, go with Seize the Moment, but if you want to benefit from this earlier, you can pick it around level 5 instead of Improved Initiative, and delay Improved Initiative to level 11. As for our bonus feat, Weapon Specialization, Fall Shard. For our level 12 Arcana, Dimension Strike at last, to make all our attacks into touch attacks. By level 13, just as with our Arcane Rider, remember to pick Perception rank 2 at Mythic rank 4 Trickster progression. After that, the special Trickster feats during normal character level up. Improved Critical Fall Shard first. The same for level 15. Another Trickster Improved Critical. As for our Arcana, Devoted Blade to add Holy. And finally, the last Trickster Improved Critical feat at level 17. As for a bonus feat, Greater Weapon Specialization, Fall Shard. At level 18, your last Arcana can be anything. I'll be going with Bane Blade as I find this one is the most useful of the remaining ones we have. As for our level 19 feat, I like going with Greater Weapons Focus and Fall Shard. But if you are going the Use Magic Device rank 3 route, which is what I'll be doing for the Wizard Spellbook, you can also pick completely normal spell here to turn some decent spells like True Strike into cantrips for infinite uses. I'll be going with the Greater Focus myself. At level 20, the last pointing Strength of course, and at long last our Weapon Mastery ability. Okay, so let's talk now about Mythic progression for our Sword Saint. And this will be in some ways similar to the Arcane Rider, but has a few differences. As usual, Instrument of Freedom for your first Ascension ability, and Elemental Barrage for Mythic level 1, as we do already have our Elemental enhancements by level 5. For Mythic rank 2, go with Mythic Power Attack. For Mythic rank 3, Ever Ready. For Mythic rank 4, be sure to pick Mythic Improved Critical, as I ended up picking it by mistake at Mythic rank 2, because this is a Respected character, but by default progression you should only be able to achieve Mythic Critical as a Sword Saint at Mythic rank 4. And of course Perception 1 rank and Perception 2 rank. For Mythic rank 5, go with Mythic Charge. Even though we aren't a mounted character, this build can also do high damage with charge. After all, we are using a rich weapon, so we'll easily hit the enemies. And this is the reason why I don't pick Last Stand. Enemies will not be targeting us because we'll get to attack from far away. But you can also pick something like Abundant Arcane Pool early. Also pick Athletics 1 for another Mythic trick, to help with removing some negative effects. based on our athletics. For Mythic 6, go with Mythic Weapon Specialization and then Full Shard. And also the Knowledge World 1 streak. For Mythic rank 7, I like going with Use Magic Device, Use Magic Device 2, so we can get the Wizard Spellbook at Mythic level 7. For Mythic rank 7, I like going with Abundant Arcane Pool. As a Sword Saint, we are kinda short on Arcane Pool points because of the Critical Strike ability. Remember that you can also pick this earlier instead of Mythic Charge. Knowledge World 1 for a lesser Mythic trick, and then use the Magic Device 3 for the greater trick to get our Wizard Spellbook. For Mythic rank 8, Mythic Weapon Focus and Full Shard. And also Lore Nature 1 for an improved trick, Knowledge World 2. As for Mythic rank 9, which is pretty much our last Mythic, Unrelenting Assault, I suppose Archmage Armor if you want to flex that high armor class, which is not needed for a character that has a reach weapon and is fighting enlarged, or even last stand if you want maximum survivability. Honestly, I'll just keep it simple and go with Unrelenting Assault. Your lesser trick left can be anything, I'll go with Mobility 1. Now, before we get into gear and spellbook allocation, let's first talk about how Magus Arcane Pool and weapon enchantments work. Besides Spellstrike and Spell Combat, all of your per day uses of Magus abilities will happen by spending points from your Arcane Pool. You have a number of points equal to half your Magus level, plus your intelligence modifier, and it refreshes once per day whenever you rest. As soon as level 1, you'll already be able to enhance your weapon with a +1 enhancement bonus that increases by another +1 for every 4 levels beyond the first. And they do stack with your current weapon enhancement, but up to a maximum of +5. Now this does get a very big boost as soon as level 5, which is when you can add elemental enchantments and also the speed and king properties to your weapon. As I said before, arcane weapon enhancement will cost 1 point from our arcane pool by default, and we have 25 here. Dimension Strike, however, costs 2 whole points, which is why we can only use it 12 times instead of 25. So to use our elemental and other types of weapon enhancement, you will have to manually turn them on by just clicking on the right section. For example, if you want flaming, just click here. The same for frost, shock, and so on. Each of these enchantments will cost a certain number of points from your weapon enhancement value that I said before starts at 1 and increases by another +1 for every 4 levels. So you won't be able to actually have all of the weapon enchantments on at all times. Ideally, in the early game you certainly want to have keen, at least until you get improved critical, and also the elemental enchantments as they cost very little at 1 point each. After you have chosen the enchantments you want, in my case all of the elemental ones, Bane Blade and also Holy Weapon, simply click on Arcane Weapon Enhancement to turn it on and gain all of the benefits to your main weapon. This won't actually work on the offhand, and if you remove your weapon for another weapon, you will lose the bonus and have to cast it again. So overall, the Magus abilities as far as using them is simple. All you have to do is click to turn the abilities you want on. Now let's talk about spell allocation for your Magus. As far as cantrips, remember that if you want to use Spell Combat and Spellstrike, you can always use Touch of Fatigue to basically get a free attack, and it does have unlimited uses. As far as level 1 spells, during the early game you certainly want to cast Grease. Even if you don't have high difficulty class, this is a perfect spell for the early game. Besides that, True Strike, because it gives you a +20 insight bonus, and that's massive, on your next single attack round. Remember that this does have around 12 seconds duration, so you can and should cast it before a tough battle, as you not have to bother spending an action to cast it. Early game, you can also really benefit from Enlarge Person, especially for our Full Shard Sword Saint character, to attack the enemies from range. For level 2 spells we have Frigid Touch if you want to use touched spells, but mostly Blur to buff your party members, and also Mirror Image. Don't forget Glitter Dust as well, which can be great in the early game. Now, because this Magus is an Arcane Rider with the True Arcana ability that lets you pick some spells from the Wizard spell list, I also have mostly a lot of Sense Vitals and False Life, and these are the spells you should also pick if you're going for the Use Magic Device 3 Greater Mythic trick to get a spell book for your Magus, which is what I do for my Sword Saint character. For level 3 spells, well, Haste of course, unless you already have another character that can cast it, Vampiric Touch for our touch spells, Placement for Concealment, and Greater Magic Weapon to buff our weapon enhancement, especially during the early game. For level 4, mostly Greater Invisibility, and also False Life Greater. Level 5 Magus spells are kinda disappointing, so unless you have the Wizard Spellbook or the Wizard spells, well, there's not much you can do with them besides Vampiric Shadow Shield. Otherwise, be sure to go with Genie Kind, and one casting of Echolocation to bypass enemy concealment. As for level 6, transformation is what really stands out. Alright, so let's now talk about gear choices for your Magus, and most of your gear choices will be the same regardless of being an Arcane Rider or a Sword Saint, besides weapon choice of course. So first we have Alexi's Magnifying Amulet as usual for the Amulet slot. Now armor choice is different between both of the builds. After all, Sword Saint characters cannot use any armor. For them, I would recommend you just go with Haramaki's as usual. But for an Arcane Rider, well, armor really doesn't matter to you because you will be mounted on your horse, and the horse's armor class is what will be targeted for attacks usually. Or even just not wear any armor at all. Notice how it doesn't make a difference to your armor class. The same for robes, you can wear anything and they aren't going to matter. As usual, I like black and rags because I think they look pretty cool. For the belt, well, if you are using a SKALD on your party, then be sure to go with Mangling Frenzy for the extra boost to critical damage. And as a trickster, we have a massive critical range. If not, then pick belts that increase both your strength and constitution by a decent amount like +6. For the glove slot, Fencer's Gift for both builds, as they will be wielding two-handed weapons for more damage. As far as boots, you have two different choices. Rona's Sacrifice will give you a great boost to dexterity and also mobility and athletics, and even double some bonuses from the haste spell. But if you fancy charging, you can also use the Boots of Stampede for up to +10 bonus on your charge attacks. For headbands, early game any headbands that increase intelligence, and later on headbands of mental perfection. I have the Goggles of Malocchio here, but you can also use the Goggles of Piercing Gaze for the +1 insight bonus against demons. As usual, Cloaks of Resistance for the cloak slot, and as for rings, of course, the Ring of Evasion and the Ring of Guiding Star. As for the braces, I really like the braces of our weapon slots to increase our sneak attack damage, but you can also use the lucky braces that you start the game with during the early game. But for a Sword Saint in particular, you can also use braces of armor up to +8 to increase your armor class, unless you picked the Archmage Armor Mythic ability. As for weapons, this is the main difference between the builds. For the Arcane Rider, you certainly want to go with Jinx, if you have a Hexer on your party like Ember or Camellia. Otherwise, you can go with the Rumbling Falchion, the final version of Finian, or even the Holy Blair. Remember that I already have a guide on the best falchions you can fight in the game, to the side here and down below in the video description. Now, for your Sword Saint who will be focused on fall shards, I'd say you can just go with Finian or the Mighty Blow of Good. These are basically the best fall shards we have at the moment. Now, playing as these builds is also very simple. First, for your Arcane Rider, be sure to always ride your horse, buff your Magus with his weapon enhancement before battle starts, and as soon as level 6 we can increase it to 1 minute per level, which is more than enough. And honestly, just spam charge at the enemy, especially if you have a SKALD that can grant you the Pounce ability to Greater Beast Totem. Remember that I also have a guide on how to properly maximize the benefit of charging, by giving you a surprise round, a free attack, and catching the enemy flat-footed for maximum damage. Remember that Dimension Strike is cast as a swift action, so you can use it before doing your main attack, so just click it here. As for your Sword Saint, be sure to cast size increasing spells on him, such as Enlarge Person and Legendary Proportions, as to highly increase your attack range so you can safely attack from behind your tanks, while not getting hit at all. Also remember to use Charge out of battle to catch the enemy unaware and get a surprise round, but when it comes to during battle, just try to use your normal attacks instead. Now let's do a quick comparison between the damage our Arcane Rider against that of our Sword Saint.
I am your end!
So for our Arcane Rider, with one hit, we were still able to do more than 1000 damage, as the secondary effects also come from the main hit, 500 of which just from our Spirited Charge ability because of mounted combat, so basically half our damage. That's not to mention the attacks from our horse, which dealt around 150 on a critical hit, and he can also contribute to generating attacks of opportunity for our party.
Surprise!
Our Sword Saint, on the other hand, dealt around 900 damage to this Apocalypse Locust, so even as a Kensai you can deal more than 1000 damage. Well, I mean, on one hand, the big damage boost from your Arcane Rider will require you to be mounted and charging. On the other hand, the Sword Saint can just attack, but for big damage, we'll have to spend points into Perfect Strike and Perfect Critical, which can add up and drain your arcane pool very fast. So overall, I hope I've managed to make the pros and cons of either Arcane Rider or Sword Saint clear. In the end, both are very strong classes, so you're certainly going to have fun with either of them. especially as they are both built to attack the enemy from safety, either when mounted or through weapon reach. Alright, so that was it everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this guide on everything you need to know about the Magus class. It can certainly deal quite an insane amount of damage to your enemies, and makes for a very smooth gameplay experience because of how early you can get some powerful features. If you have another way you enjoy building your Magus that you think I didn't talk about, then please be sure to comment down below. Thank you for watching as usual, and if you liked this video and want to support the channel, please remember to subscribe and even become a member. See you next time, friends!